welcome to For the Love of Nature, a podcast where we tell you everything you need to know about nature and probably more than you wanted to know. I'm Fawks Lapole, and today we are here with Sara Clark from the Duke Lemur Center. We're celebrating World Lemur Day. You aren't listening to this episode on the exact day, but we're celebrating it the whole week. So we're really excited to have Sara here with us. Duke is a great place, and I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction with her, and then we're going to get started just doing some interview stuff, and hopefully you'll learn all sorts of cool things about both lemurs and the Duke Lemur Center. So just to introduce Sara a little bit, Sara is the Duke Lemur Center's Director of Communications, where her job is to talk science to a non-scientific audience, kind of like what we do here on the podcast. A 7th-generation farm kid from rural Appalachia, she enrolled in her first college course the summer after her sophomore year of high school, finished undergrad with a 4.0 GPA, and graduated magna cum laude from Duke University with her master's in 2009, where she was probably the only Blue Devil who could read in 4 languages, hawk a pickup truck, and castrate a goat, which is an amazing repertoire. Dang, that's impressive. At the Duke Lemur Center, from 2016 to present, Sara helps oversee the education and outreach department, including the tour program and retail shop, manages the Duke Lemur Center website, social media, marketing, public messaging, and printed publications. She develops press releases and public relations campaigns, and interfaces with campus, regional, national, and even international media, from local news stations to the Washington Post, NPR, the Times of London, the New York Times, National Geographic, Animal Planet, Netflix, and the BBC. She's been hired as an expert reviewer for National Geographic, coordinated international film shoots, and served as an intern manager and mentor for high school and college students interested in STEM and STEM education. So with all of that impressiveness, we are so fortunate to have Sara with us today. As our listeners know, our podcast is still small, but we really wanted to focus on lemurs, especially since Katie and I have both done World Lemur Day at the zoos that we've worked at. We figured why not highlight them on the podcast? And anyone who is in this field knows if you talk about lemurs, Duke Lemur Center comes up because they're the experts. So thanks so much, Sara, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get started with our questions. About you, before we get into World Lemur Day stuff, did you ever think that you'd be doing this type of work?
No, I had no idea. And I feel so lucky to have found it in the really roundabout way that I did. So you mentioned in my intro, I'm from a farm in rural Appalachia. I go home and my neighbors are Amish.
Yeah.
Get a cell phone signal. We have dial-up internet.
Yep.
So if you had told me when I was 12 that someday I'd be at a place like the Duke Lemur Center, like a globally ranked university just outside the Silicon Valley of the East here, I wouldn't have believed you at all.
Right. And it's something you have in common. Both Katie and I, we're both from Pennsylvania. I'm South Central. She's near Pittsburgh. So we're both kind of rural, mountainish people as well.
I love it.
Okay, well, so now that you've gotten into this exciting career, what's your favorite aspect of your job?
Well, the lemurs, of course. Of course, that's the obvious answer. We have 215 lemurs here at the Duke Lemur Center, and we're on 100 acres. So to be able to look out my office window and see these endangered and critically endangered animals, literally like in the North Carolina pine trees,
right,
is just incredible. But aside from that really obvious answer, the DLC is just an incredible place to be, and the work is really, really rewarding. So my background prior to coming here was in a lot of like sales and marketing. And for the first time in my life, here at the Lemur Center, I'm working at a job that unifies kind of my professional and my personal life, those two worlds that I live in and love, which is really, really cool. So I'm back around animals. I'm back in the wild. And I get to use the skills that I've developed over the past 14 years to really help spread the word about lemurs. So I always say when I teach my interns, like, we are shouters and we're artists and we're writers. And what we do is we shout at people to care. Without communication, people have no idea what's going on or how they can.
Right.
And you can't care about what you don't know about. So I get to do that.
Exactly.
With really incredible animals. And I love talking to you today because it's just another way that I can reach a new audience.
Yeah. Especially I feel like here in the United States, lemurs aren't in the center of our minds because we don't have them here in the United States. So it's even more important to hear about people who work with them just to be like, oh, right, they do exist and they still need our help.
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many more species and so much more diversity than like the ring-tailed lemur that you might see
Right.
in a cartoon or at the
Totally.
zoo.
Yeah, I definitely think that ringtails are probably the one most people are familiar with because of Zaboomafoo and Madagascar and
Yeah,
stuff
and
like that.
ringtails are actually the most common primates in captivity in the world.
Wow, I did not know that.
They're very hardy, but also just their prevalence kind of, we see them so often in media that it kind of, these are also endangered animals. They may seem
Right, yeah,
but,
you're right.
like in the wild, there are actually very, very few ring-tailed lemurs, and people just have no idea.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, to talk about, that's a great segue, a little bit of lemur background for some of our listeners. So lemurs, of course, are super interesting creatures. And for our listeners who might have only ever seen them in things like movies, shows, and maybe at the zoo,
Yeah.
can you give us a little bit of brief natural history about them?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be a lemur means two things. One, you live in the wild only on the island of Madagascar, which is kind of off of the southeastern coast of Africa. And
Right.
two, you are threatened with extinction. So lemurs as a group are among the most endangered vertebrates on Earth.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not the club that you want to be in.
Right, yeah, definitely not.
17 species of lemur have already gone extinct, at least. Those are the ones that we know about. And 98% of the remaining species are threatened with extinction. Of those, 31% are critically endangered, which is one step away from extinction in the wild. And in many cases, because these animals are so evolved to these particular environmental niches, they can't even be kept in captivity. So
Yeah.
once they're gone from Madagascar, they're gone forever.
I feel like that's the downside of always living on an island. Even if it's a big island like Madagascar, you're still only in one place.
Exactly. Yes. That island part of geography is really, really cool. And also, yeah, really, really hard.
Right.
Especially once, people arrived on the island of Madagascar. We're not exactly sure when, maybe about 4,000 years ago. And since then, about 90% of the island has been deforested. And there are a lot of people on the island. So they're all competing for resources with the native
Right.
fauna. So it's a really tough situation for everyone.
Definitely.
Lemurs. We always get asked, how did lemurs get on the island of Madagascar? And
True.
why aren't they anywhere else? And the answer is actually really cool. So like 50 million years ago, approximately, again, we're not entirely sure. The fossil record in Madagascar is really, really sparse. But about 50 million years ago, the ancestors of today's lemurs actually rafted across the Mozambique Channel from mainland Africa.
That is crazy to picture.
Isn't it?
And how many at one time would have to come across to establish a population, or was it slowly over time? I'd be curious.
We think it was probably a singular rafting event for those ancestral lemurs, aside from the ii. So the ancestor of the ii, we think, came over in a separate rafting event, which is why the ii is so weird.
Yeah, it is.
But you're right. The fact that there was a population large enough, and that there were males and females of breeding age, who were on this raft. And we say raft, I don't want people to picture the
little sail. Yeah, I know. That's definitely what I'm picturing.
Yeah, really, we're talking about clumps of vegetation. So when you think of a mangrove forest along a coastline, for example, there are trees, they're very close to the water. There are animals living in those trees, and sometimes there are cyclones, and sometimes there are hurricanes, and those clumps of vegetation might be knocked out into sea. And when they're knocked out in the sea, the animals are trapped on them, and so they go rafting. And
at least they're stuck with their family. If you're going to be washed out to sea, at least you're with others.
That's true. Yeah, so we think that, that's how islands and other places around the world have been populated throughout time. And we're talking millions and millions and millions of years.
Right.
So very, very lucky for the ancestral lemurs. They were able to survive that fairly long trip across the Mozambique Channel. And they drifted somehow from mainland Africa to the island of Madagascar. And they survived there. And they became isolated from the rest of the world, and lemurs' ancestors went extinct on the mainland, like African continent, whether they were outcompeted by monkeys or threatened by carnivores. Think of all like the big African carnivores that are
Oh yeah, there's a lot to be worried about.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas on Madagascar, there were almost no other animals or predators there. So those ancestral lemurs hit jackpot.
Yeah, totally.
They wound up, this is the fourth largest island in the world. There are multiple like geographic and climate zones. There was very little competition for resources. It was pretty uninhabited by other animals when lemurs arrived. And there were so many niches to fill. So from that one ancestral population, we just see this explosion into at least 125 different species of lemur that evolved on the island.
Yeah, that's so cool about island geography that usually that does happen. It just starts and then blossoms into all these different species to fill it.
Yeah, and we see all kinds of kind of weird adaptations.
Yeah,
which is really cool. Lemurs, we also see a huge range in size. So we have both very, very small lemurs. So the little mouse lemur that is maybe like 3 or 4 ounces that could fit in the palm of your hand.
So cute.
But then we also have the giant lemurs. Archaeoindris is extinct now within the last few hundred years, but it was the size of a gorilla. So
whoa,
so much variation. We also have nocturnal lemurs and diurnal lemurs and ephemeral lemurs and lemurs that hibernate and lemurs that walk on 4 legs and lemurs that walk on 2 legs and omnivores and frugivores and insectivores and the eye. That's just
so and the eye.
But when Western scientists found the eye, they were like, "What is this? We don't even know." They thought it was a
lemur. Yeah, like a lemur with mange. That's
they didn't even think it was a lemur. They're like, "There's no way this thing can be a primate. It is just bizarre." So they're just this incredible example of speciation in response to these environmental niches and challenges. And that's one of the things that makes them so fascinating to study. And we're still discovering new species. We discovered a new species of mouse lemur like a year ago.
Whoa!
So there's so much still to learn.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you'd think, right, like on an island, how hard can it be to, but I know that there are other species on Madagascar they're finding too, like a chameleon I think they found recently and some things like that.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is. So much out there.
Well, so you were talking, about lemurs and their natural history, and I think a lot of our listeners probably associate, a lemur, it's got a tail, looks a lot like a monkey, it's probably related to a monkey. Can you tell us a little bit about how they are different?
Yeah, sure. So they are related to monkeys. So anybody listening who thinks that lemurs are monkeys, you are not terribly far off. But they're a different kind of primate. So lemurs are strepsirrhine primates. Basically, that means that they have these long, kind of wet noses, like dogs. Look at a lemur, they have that long nose, whereas monkeys, apes, humans, we have those like shorter snub noses. And like dogs, lemurs rely really heavily on their sense of smell. Again, as opposed to humans, for example, who rely primarily on our sense of sight.
Right. And I know that usually wet noses help with smell.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So lemurs are very, very smell oriented. And we call them more primitive primates, but that's not necessarily true. There are distant relatives. They're probably like that first kind of branch of primates that kind of split from the monkey, ape, and human line.
Okay.
So I don't want to imply that the lemurs that we see today are primitive, because that's not true. There's still millions and millions of years of evolution
Gotcha.
since those ancestral animals split. But they're weird. They're different. They share a lot of traits with other primates. They have those big brains. They have grasping hands. They have fingernails, not claws. They have those forward-facing eyes. They're social. They invest heavily in their offspring. And they live fairly long lives, like other primates. But they, like I said, evolved before monkeys. And so they retain traits that are unusual among those later primates, those New World, Old World monkeys and apes. So
Gotcha.
lemurs, They do have opposable thumbs, just like all primates, but they're only semi-opposable, for example. So instead of being able to like pinch with your thumb and pointer finger, imagine having the dexterity of, if you're wearing an oven mitt on your hands.
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
So that means that lemurs can't necessarily like pick dirt or bugs out of their fur. So they have retained this tooth comb structure. So their bottom teeth are fused into a comb-like structure that they use for grooming. Later,
convenient.
Yeah, exactly. Later, monkeys, don't have that tooth comb structure. So that's different. Lemurs also have a toilet claw or a grooming claw. So we don't have any claws. Lemurs still have one. Good for scratching. They also don't have eyes that are fully encased in bone. They rely a lot on scent marking. Again, that like strong sense of smell. And some lemur, this is really cool. Some lemurs also hibernate.
I didn't know that one.
Yeah, so the fat-tailed dwarf lemur can actually hibernate for up to 7 months on the island of Madagascar.
Dang.
Yeah. And no other primate can hibernate. So we think that maybe this was a very, very ancestral like primate trait that lemurs have retained as a survival mechanism that we no longer have. So another cool fact is that lemurs, the vast, vast majority of them, are actually female dominant, whereas most of the other animals, and certainly other primates, are male dominant. In fact, you will not see any male dominant lemur species. As good as it gets for the guys is a couple of species who are co-dominant.
Well, they'll throw them a bone every now and then.
Exactly. But for the most part, lemurs are female dominant. This is my big beef. One of many, with the movie Madagascar, because
you're right, King Julius. Yeah,
right. It should be like Queen Julian. There is no instance in any like lemur species that would ever see a king.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that would have been such an easy fact check to do,
right? And they could have a really cool like girl power movie.
Totally.
But yeah, so lemurs are so cool. That's just a few of the.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's tons
from others.
Okay, so you had mentioned, you don't really like to refer to them as primitive, and which I love because I think, when, at least in the zoo world, we talk about like pro-simians and pre and primitive, so they're often referred to as fossil primates. What does that mean?
I think that's primarily a reference to the fact that they are our most distant relatives within the primate family tree.
Gotcha.
And it does underscore the fact that because that lineage kind of split from the other primate lineages so long ago and became isolated on this island, it does underscore the fact that lemurs are really unique among today's primates. And it is cool because by studying these really, really early representatives of the primate family tree, we can gain a lot of insight into primate evolution.
Yeah.
So yeah, we think of them, living fossils or fossil primates. That's accurate in some ways, but I don't like to use that phrase because it does make it sound like they're still very primitive, and they're not.
Right. It's not like they have it. Like when I usually think of like living fossils, I think of like the horseshoe crab, which is literally not changed. Whereas like lemurs have changed a lot.
Yes. Exactly. That's a great example.
Gotcha. Okay, so now that you've told us a little bit about their natural history, what is so important about lemurs, at least in their ecosystems of Madagascar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're important in so many ways. Of course, every part of an ecosystem is so interconnected.
Right. Not to imply that every living thing doesn't have some importance.
Exactly, which is why we, at the Lemur Center, we want to preserve the entire forest ecosystem, not just the lemurs. But lemurs certainly play a critical role within their forest environments. So a lot of fruit-eating lemurs are really critical seed dispersers. So they actually swallow these whole seeds as they eat fruit, and then they kind of pass them through their guts almost undigested. But they're within their intestines just long enough that the exteriors of the seeds are softened by the lemur's intestinal juices. And then those seeds are passed kind of intact in poop.
Yep.
So they fall to the forest floor where, encased in their own packets of fertilizer, they're softened enough that they can germinate well.
Very cool.
So lemurs are important not just for kind of moving the seeds from one place to another as they eat, travel, and poop, but also for the fertilization of those seeds and softening the outer layer of the seeds. If those outer layers aren't softened by these intestinal juices, they actually can't germinate very easily.
I was just going to say, it really shows the relationship that the plants now have with the lemurs because they've both been there so long together that they're relying on one another.
Yeah, precisely. Another instance of that is that lemur species are also pollinators. So the ruffed lemurs, R-U-F-F-E-D lemurs, there are two species, the black and white ruffed lemur and the red ruffed lemur. They're actually known as the largest pollinators in the world. And their name...
So cool.
I know, it's amazing. And their name actually refers to a ruff of fur kind of around the sides of their faces and their chins. And as they feed on flowers, they stick their faces in these giant flowers, and pollen sticks to the ruffs of fur around their faces. And then as they travel from tree to tree and flower to flower, they're actually transporting that pollen. So if lemurs go extinct, if these ruffed lemurs, which are critically endangered, if they go extinct, the trees that rely on them for seed dispersal and pollination may also go extinct. So not to mention they're natural prey for natural predators that are native to Madagascar, like the fossa. We don't like to think about that, but the fossa also needs things to eat, and lemurs.
Yeah, true.
Lemurs are that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. I feel like the being prey is often something that people are like, but yeah, it's just as important as being pollinators and seed dispersers and the other bits too.
Exactly.
I also really like to picture the ruffed lemurs just with their little faces covered in pollen, but it's a really cute image.
It's very, very cute in person too. We of course have them here in North Carolina, and we have pollen season every spring, and they're just covered.
The little flower children of the lemur world.
Exactly.
Well, perfect. You just mentioned the Duke Lemur Center. So for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with it, Duke Lemur Center does a ton, but its physical site is here in the United States, in North Carolina. Could you tell us a little bit more about the center?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're located in Durham, North Carolina. We were founded in 1966. So this is actually our 55th anniversary. And we're cool. Here on 100 acres in Duke Forest. So just a couple of miles from Duke's main campus. And again, we have 100 acres. We have 215 animals actually on site across 13 different species. So that is the most diverse population of lemurs on Earth outside their native Madagascar.
That's incredible.
It really is. Such a gift to have here in North Carolina. You'd never expect it.
Right.
One of the reasons we have so much space, too, is that the lemurs actually live in what we call natural habitat enclosures. Now, not all of them can. Some are too old. But a lot of our lemurs actually free range in the North Carolina forest.
So cool.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's great for their welfare. It also means that when we study and watch and observe them, we can see these like natural social dynamics. They're living in these natural social groups. They're acting like lemurs should. So,
yeah, I'm sure it's much more enriching than, being in a more sterile environment.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to say that some of our lemurs don't live indoors, but we try as much as possible for them to free range as much.
Oh, right. Yeah, everyone, you're going to have to take care of those that are sick or those that are elderly, and yeah.
Exactly. So we also have lemurs that are on loan to other institutions around the United States and around the world. So other AZA accredited institutions who have lemurs. Many of those lemurs that you see are actually owned by the Duke Lemur Center and are on loan to those institutions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which we love because then more people are exposed to lemurs who maybe can't come out to North Carolina. It also means that, it means that we can keep more animals here because other zoos are keeping animals there. And that's critical. 100 acres is great, but it's not enough. So I love having these populations elsewhere. We actually just sent 8 cockerel shafak to Europe. So There are now shafak in Europe for the first time ever. Yeah, to help establish the European conservation breeding program there.
Very cool.
Yes.
Do you know where they're going to be displayed?
Tier Park and, I know this, Cheshire. So the Chester Zoo in Cheshire, England. We have Tier Park Zoo in Germany. And then there's another institution in Germany as well. I should know this. I just wrote like the press release.
No, it's all right. I was really wondering what countries more than anything.
Yeah. So Germany and the UK.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, very, very exciting. And I just mentioned our conservation breeding program. Like a big part of what we do here is conservation breeding. So we've celebrated more than 3,285 births here at the Duke Lemur Center since we were founded.
Wow.
And we actually maintain the world's largest genetic safety net for lemurs. So that means that if the worst happens, if lemurs go extinct on the island of Madagascar, or these species go extinct on the island of Madagascar, we have a safety net population here. We have not lost them forever. We preserve the species, and we also preserve the option of once, maybe some of the problems facing Madagascar are addressed and fixed, maybe we can reintroduce some of these species or like repopulate wild populations. And we have done that. We're not doing it a lot now. Unfortunately, because the pressures are so great on the island, we'd rather...
Right, there's no point in sending him to a bad situation.
Exactly. But these safety net populations of the Duke Lemur Center and these other zoos that we work with mean that, they're thriving at least in the US, at least in Europe, at least in Japan. So...
And they've got a genetic diversity, too, because you've got so many.
Exactly. And so... we work with these partner institutions to create these species survival plans, which offer breeding recommendations for individuals based on genetics. Because you're exactly right. You do want the most genetically diverse populations possible because those are going to be the most healthy and the most resilient. That said, for the blue-eyed black lemur, for example, there are only maybe 24 in captivity within North America. We only have maybe 30 eyes within captivity in North America. So it's a challenge. We're trying to make these populations as diverse as possible and trying to bring in unrelated individuals as much as possible.
Yeah, Katie and I were fortunate enough. We were both at the Little Rock Zoo where they had a blue-eyed black.
Oh, gosh.
Which was so cool.
Yeah.
Because it's the only primate with blue eyes, correct?
With consistently blue eyes. One of four. So there's... of course, humans can have blue eyes. Also, the species of macaque, I think, also has consistent blue eyes.
Cool.
But that blue-eyed black lemur is actually the most rare species that we house here. There are maybe, I guess, the population estimate that I heard most recently was 1,000 or fewer individuals remaining in the wild, and that population estimate was from about 5 years ago. Yeah. So, it's hard.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah, it's incredible when other zoos can house our blue-eyed black lemurs for us and work with us in those breeding programs because then we can house more of them here and have more babies.
Oh, absolutely. And it sounds like, obviously you all are doing something right because for you to have so many births, they have to feel comfortable. They have to have good care. Yeah, so obviously it's very successful.
Exactly. And I think most people don't realize, there is no handbook, really, for lemur veterinary medicine. When we brought eyes over in the 80s, they hadn't been kept, in North America before. So a lot of it is learning, how best to care for these animals and then sharing that information with the rest of the world.
Right.
So critical part of what we do and really, really fascinating as well.
Are people able to visit the center at any point or is there a way to see it online?
Yeah, there is. So our website is lemur.duke.edu. You can go there and you can see the tour offerings that we have.
Gotcha.
We do host visitors. We are closed for the season now, aside from just a few tours. But pre-COVID, we were welcoming about 32,000 people a year on tours to teach people about lemurs. Also, really critical for our budget. We're not fully funded.
Oh, I'm sure.
So about 21% of our income, which goes towards our conservation programs and lemur care, actually comes from the tour program.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, but even if you're not in North Carolina, we have virtual options too. So you can.
That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially if there's any teachers listening out there, I feel like that would be a really cool thing to do with your students.
Yes, for sure. And teachers, if you are interested, we actually made our basic like virtual tour free. So you can use it in your classrooms. Please.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then there's some other premium options too that folks can pay for. And all of that income goes right back to the Duke Lemur Center, supporting our conservation program, supporting the education and outreach programs. So
excellent.
Please check us out.
So Katie and I know that Duke does a lot of research that's drastically benefited lemurs over the year. And I feel like I had said earlier, you know, if lemurs come up in a conversation, at least in the zoo field, so does Duke Lemur Center. So what sort of research are you guys currently doing at the center?
Yeah, great question. And this is one that it's going to be a long answer to a very short.
No, it's fine. I mean, research is something that both of us are interested in, and hopefully a lot of our listeners.
Fantastic. So to start, I just want to clarify that the Lemur Center has pioneered a research program that is completely non-invasive. That means that we don't do research that will harm our animals in any way.
Right. So it's not right. Research doesn't have to be yeah,
exactly. I always like to clarify that because when people hear primate research center,
yes,
it raises some flags, as it should.
Yes.
The Lemur Center is focused entirely on non-invasive techniques, and we have developed strategies that yield high quality scientific data. We are within a globally ranked research institution here at Duke University, while also maintaining the highest standards of care for the animals. These are endangered species. Their welfare is our utmost priority. Everything else comes after that.
Gotcha.
But because we're home to such a diverse number of species, and that encompasses like this huge range of social systems and locomotion and dietary preferences and so on, that makes for an equally large and diverse research program. So people come from all around the world to study topics that range from brain sciences to biomechanics and One Health disease dynamics and aging and paleontology and genomics and so much more.
Wow.
We also have, in addition to accommodating all of that outside research, we have 2 on-staff research scientists who are focusing on the gut microbiome and hibernation.
Cool.
Which is really cool. And when I think about our research, it really comes down to like 3 purposes, and some research serves multiple purposes of these 3. But first, what we do tends to inform the care of lemurs kind of within human care. So for example, when Dr. Green is studying the cockerel shafak kind of gut microbiome, right? That helps us determine the best diet to feed those animals.
Right, because you were saying before, you're going in kind of blind. This hasn't been done before.
Exactly. And we are the institution that pioneered, being able to keep these cockerel shafaks. They're very, very fragile. They're so, again, with these lemurs, like 125 species on the island, right? They're so narrowly evolved to these ecological niches.
So specialized.
Exactly. Yeah. So Dr. Green is studying like wild lemurs on the island of Madagascar, comparing that data to kind of what the microbiome within our animals looks like, and kind of trying to get our animals as close to wild as possible, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Which is amazing. And then we share that information with other institutions that house the cockerel shafak. We also have the best lemur veterinarians in the world. We have a staff of 4 veterinarians and vet techs, and they work side by side with our researchers to determine how best to care for our colony. So it's very research informed. And again, all of that information is shared with other institutions that house lemurs. We also bring veterinarians over from Madagascar, and we teach them how to care for lemurs. We work with the North Carolina State Veterinary School.
Cool.
We work with other zoo vets. So a lot of that, again, we're learning and then spreading. So second purpose of our research here is that it informs our conservation work in Madagascar. So we've been caring for lemurs here in Durham for 55 years. For about 37 years, we've also been working on the ground on the island of Madagascar to
excellent
care for and conserve lemurs in their natural habitat. And so by studying here the variables that most affect lemurs' health and their reproduction and their social dynamics, we can then take that, kind of use it to focus our conservation work in Madagascar. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then lastly, research with lemurs can also shed light on human diseases and health concerns that affect humans. So remember, these guys are primates. We're also primates. And lemurs, for example, will develop the same plaques and tangles on their brains that humans diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia will develop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we have just started this phase of research, so we don't have any results yet, and we're still in the training process. But actually working with our mouse lemurs, and it's a great example of non-invasive research techniques, to kind of teach them games, basically on an iPhone. So one of our researchers, Ray Bagel, actually kind of pioneered this with ruffed lemurs on iPads. Ruffed lemurs are much bigger than baby mouse lemurs that are 4 ounces. So these the mouse lemurs are taught to like play games, basically, sort of on an iPad or on an iPhone. And then we can actually look at their performance as they age. Like, here's how they did it, like 1 year. Here's how they did it 8 years old. And we can see if there's evidence of cognitive decline at any point. And then we're also...
So it's going to be long-term
Exactly.
study.
Yeah. But it's a long-term study. And then if we see that, like the plan is, and we're working on this right now as well, to kind of use positive reinforcement training to train these mouse lemurs to stand still long enough for a voluntary MRI.
Awesome.
So we can also see if there are any brain changes that are associated with that decline in cognitive performance. And what does that mean for Alzheimer's? Does it mean that there are ways to kind of even diagnose or suspect, the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's, certainly before what we're seeing now? What do those changes look like? How can you tell? So that's an interesting project. Another thing is we're studying like hibernation in fat-tailed dwarf lemurs. I mentioned before, they're the world's only hibernating primates. And hibernation is an interesting adaptive strategy. It helps the dwarf lemurs in Madagascar get through that season of food scarcity. But for humans, the US military is actually really interested in hibernation and sleep, because maybe once we learn about hibernation, we can learn how to lessen the effect of sleep deprivation in soldiers on these really long combat missions.
That'd be cool.
Right? Or these dwarf lemurs in Madagascar, they might hibernate for 7 months, and then they wake up and they leave their hibernacula and they immediately breed. We don't see evidence of much like muscle atrophy, for example. Whereas if a human were immobile for that long, we would see severe atrophy.
Right.
So why is that? And are there implications there for humans and comas? These little lemurs also can live up to 10 years longer than their non-hibernating cousins. So are there anti-aging like benefits or genes that we can identify? I don't know. It's really fascinating, and it's maybe not necessarily the primary purpose of what we're doing, but there's certainly this kind of translational value to lemur research.
Right. No, absolutely. And might as well take advantage of, you've got the expertise, you have the lemurs to work with. Yeah. Why not? Especially if it's, they're like you said, non-invasive, they're in their natural habitats. I can't think of a better situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's great for everyone.
Right. And I'm sure it's enriching for the lemurs. I know at the zoo, training is a form of enrichment. Absolutely. And, it makes them have a different day.
Yeah. It is intellectually stimulating. It also means that, I'm sure that you do as we do, like teach them to sit on a scale voluntarily. That minimizes handling, which therefore minimizes stress to the animal.
Right.
They don't want to be caught any more than we want to.
Right. Animal husbandry stuff is, so helpful.
Exactly. So yeah, you're exactly right. It's very enriching and enhances welfare as well.
Cool. Well, you had mentioned in your second point that, it helps you, doing this research helps you with your conservation in Madagascar. Can you expand on that a little? What type of research is being done in Madagascar, or what kind of work?
Mm-hmm. So we do, again, a lot in Madagascar. We've been really lucky, especially during COVID, that we have a Malagasy staff over there who's been able to continue the work, even though we've been kind of caught stateside. But in Madagascar, we study wild lemurs. We are primarily focused on that Sava. We call it the Sava region of Madagascar. Basically, 4 cities up in the north, kind of eastern part of Madagascar, near Marojejy National Park. So they're still intact, like beautiful old growth rainforest, and that's what we're focused on protecting. So we conduct expeditions within Marojejy National Park and within that Sava region of the island to look at species health and diversity. We also partner with a local university there. It's a local undergraduate university, and we offer workshops and assist with research projects and help students within that university gain hands-on experience conducting research. So
awesome.
Training and empowering the next generation of Malagasy to do this conservation.
Which is so important.
Exactly. And the university there is really cool because the students who graduate from it tend to stay in that area. So we're investing in these students, and then they in turn reinvest in the area, and they're going to be the next generation of conservation leaders in Madagascar. And that's amazing. So,
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Right. And if you're going to, if there's any hope for lemurs, Madagascar and the people who live there are going to be such a big factor in that.
Absolutely. And we have seen in our 3.5 decades working there, it's been so encouraging to see more and more Malagasy conservationists. So Madagascar was closed to Westerners through the 80s. When it was opened back up to Western scientists, we saw a lot of Western scientists and conservationists going to Madagascar, and very few trained Malagasy conservationists and scientists. And now that has flipped, which is incredible.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I feel like isn't that unfortunately the way it normally goes, is it seems like the indigenous peoples are often overlooked.
Exactly, right. But we need to partner with Madagascar. And Madagascar recognizes what they have. So having Malagasy actually working on the island is outstanding. We work with Malagasy communities and organizations and the government to lead a lot of conservation projects on the island as well. So thinking about conservation in addition to research, of course, there's a ton of overlap. So it's almost a false distinction.
Right.
But we have ex-situ as well as in-situ projects. And ex-situ projects are the ones that address the care of lemurs living outside the forest.
Oh, good. I'm glad you clarified that for people.
Yes. Whereas in-situ projects are the ones kind of addressing conservation of wild lemurs still living in the forest. But for the lemurs living outside the forest, Madagascar has 14 licensed zoos and wildlife parks.
Wow.
Those are populated in many cases by lemurs that have been illegally pulled from the wild to go to the pet trade, but then have been found and confiscated by the government and then put in these institutions, which is great because they have these lemur populations.
Right. And so they've have to go somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So the government of Madagascar actually approached the Duke Lemur Center in 2017 for assistance in developing a lemur care manual and training program for all of those zoos to enhance the care of the lemurs living there, and also to develop an organized conservation breeding program for those animals and zoos, similar to what we're doing here in the United States. Which is amazing because those are going to be the lemurs that are the best candidates for repopulating the wild populations in Madagascar. We don't have
because they're already there.
We don't have to get site use permits. We don't, they're already there. And so it's an incredible opportunity. And our in situ initiatives, again, like working with the lemurs that are still in the forest, focus a lot on kind of ecosystems within that Sava region of northeastern Madagascar, and preserving natural habitat there.
Very cool. Okay, so since you mentioned just now that you do like to work with communities a lot, and so you practice community-based conservation, which is so incredibly important. For our listeners now out there, can you explain a little bit what is community-based conservation, and what programs do you have that are community-based?
Yeah, sure. So the Duke Lemur Center works side by side with the people and organizations of Madagascar. And we work particularly with communities in kind of forest bordering areas. And we work with them to promote in kind of environmental sustainability. So to help lemurs, first we need to help the local people. And we're trying to find ways to partner with them to kind of address the root causes of forest destruction.
Right.
And to improve the lives of local people in ways that will also have a lasting impact on protecting forests. And as I mentioned earlier, our goal is to protect the entire forest ecosystem, not just the lemurs. We want all of the plants and animals living within to be protected because it's all such an interdependent.
Right, just like with the plants and with the seed dispersing. Yes, all connected.
Yes, so that is our overarching mission. Madagascar is hard, though. I mean, conservation everywhere is hard, but Madagascar is one of the 10 poorest countries in the world, and the primary driver of forest destruction is subsistence agriculture.
Yes.
So we don't see the huge like palm oil like plantations by big business, in Madagascar in the same way that you do elsewhere in like South or Central America. These are individual families who are trying to feed their families, and they're burning little pockets of forest to create farmland or to create charcoal so they can cook their food.
Right. And yeah, I mean, if you've got to take care of your family, no one's ever going to prioritize lemurs over their own families.
Exactly. And rightfully so.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's way too easy for Westerners to kind of look from outside and be like, but lemurs are so special.
I think that I do think there's a tendency to do that. Right. Like, well, why can't they just stop doing that?
Right. Well, it's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so examples of what we're doing are we do a lot of workshops in the area teaching more sustainable methods of agriculture. That reduces the need to burn trees to create additional farmland. It also means that, families are able to use more efficient farming methods, for example, to grow more food, which they can then eat or sell. So it's a win-win for everyone, and it preserves the forest and the soil from being depleted. Another thing that we do is providing options for alternative protein sources. So again, hunger is an issue in Madagascar.
Right.
Bushmeat hunting is really important within the traditional Malagasy diet, which otherwise is really rice heavy and doesn't have a lot of protein. So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so very, very heavily rice focused. And lemurs, as well as fossa and other native wildlife, they are a protein source, right? And ideally, we would like to provide an alternative protein source.
Right, yeah.
One of the projects that we do is support the creation of a community fish pond within these.
Oh, cool.
So the creation of the pond and then the training. And we use a native fish. It's a native paratilapia fish that is traditionally a part of the traditional diet in Madagascar, but unfortunately has been overfished and is now endangered. So communities can, have these fish ponds. They can raise fish. We ask that they take a small percentage of those fish and return them to wild rivers to replenish the local population.
Oh, wow.
But then,
doing two things at once.
Exactly. But then the rest of the fish they have either for consumption as a protein source, or they can sell them to purchase other things that they might need.
Cool.
So, again, addressing kind of the root causes of forest destruction is the way forward. It's slow.
I think that's so true.
Yeah. It's slow. It requires a lot of relationship building and a lot of commitment on, from all parties, but what we've learned in 3 decades in Madagascar is that it is absolutely essential.
No, thank you. Sorry, Alora is she is very depressed about the lemur situation. No. Well, we're almost finished. So before we let our listeners go, Katie and I always feel that there needs to be a good call to action. So how can our listeners get involved after listening? And I'm sure everyone is thinking, wow, lemurs are so cool and the Duke Lemur Center is doing so much. What can we do?
Yeah. Thank you. It is really depressing when we just educate and we don't empower. So I appreciate the opportunity for actionable items. So Madagascar is really far away. It can be really hard for somebody who's sitting here in North Carolina or anywhere to maybe impact Madagascar directly, right? The best way for you to do that is to support the Duke Lemur Center and other reputable and responsible organizations that do conservation work there. We, the Duke Lemur Center, rely exclusively on grants and private donations to fund our conservation programs. So it really does mean the world to us. Even if it's just $5, you have no idea how far $5 can go in Madagascar.
Well, I'm sure if you're saying the top 10 poorest countries, I'm sure it can go pretty far.
Yeah, exactly. I can't state it enough. Even if it doesn't feel like you in America are doing that much by donating $5, it means so much to us. Another thing that you can do, I know that not everybody has the means to donate financially, but you can raise awareness. Please tell people about lemurs. Please tell people about Madagascar. People can't help what they don't know about. And there's a lot of misinformation there about lemurs. So many people don't know how endangered these species are. And the more people you tell, the more people who are interested and the more people who might ultimately help. And that's what we need.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Another thing that anybody can do is please don't support the lemur pet trade, either directly or indirectly. And I know a lot of people out there would be like, oh, I'd never keep a lemur as a pet. And that is great. I appreciate that. But there are ways that you can support it indirectly without even realizing it. So please avoid any hands-on encounters with any primates. Do not touch or feed an animal at a petting zoo. Do not, a wild animal, a goat is fine. But avoid businesses and wildlife parks that offer contact with lemurs or lorises or other wild animals. And don't like or share images on social media of primates in human settings. I don't care how cute that ring-tailed lemur is in a diaper on somebody's shoulder.
Right.
That is problematic because viewing lemurs in contact with humans increases the public perception that they're suitable as pets or they're playmates or they're photo props. These are endangered animals.
Right.
They're in urgent need of conservation and they are not playthings.
No, I think that's so important. Right, because a lot of our listeners, of course, yes. No, I would never have a lemur as a pet. But they might pay to get their photo taken with one, or they might share a TikTok. Yeah.
Exactly. And I didn't realize before I got this job how problematic that is.
Oh, same. It's only recently have I started thinking like, oh, right.
Yeah.
It's like the social media aspect, at least. I, of course, knew about like photos and things, but yeah, the social media and sharing of things is a whole new world.
Exactly. And lastly, I also just want to underscore, no matter where you are, you can be active, like at home. Please conserve your local ecosystems. The Malagasy ecosystem is also in dire need of conservation, but locally we're seeing just native species just plummeting. So please, when you are planning your garden, for example, plant native trees and flowers instead of non-native ones. Those natives are so much better for your local pollinators, your local birds, and for sustaining your local wildlife. Don't use pesticides or herbicides or chemical fertilizers on your lawns. Those are terrible for the environment and they're terrible for insects, which are critical to the functioning of your ecosystem. And try to educate other people about that. Try to help with cleaning up your local streams. Like we could go on and on and on here, but the most important thing is to start locally and expand from there.
Right, because we don't want, worst case scenario, of course, we don't want what happens in Madagascar to happen in our own ecosystems.
Precisely. And we're seeing it. I mean, native birds, monarchs, bees. It's rough. It's rough out there.
But thankfully there are actionable things. Well, Sara, if you could leave our listeners with one thing to remember, or I mean, people are going to remember a lot from this podcast, I'm sure. But if there's any advice to anyone listening, do you have any, or is there anything like this is your opportunity to shine, plug what you want to plug?
It's so hard because there's so much to say.
I'm sure.
So I would say two things. One is, if you can do nothing else, at least share your love of lemurs with the people you care about. There's a veterinarian in Rwanda who's like very active in crane conservation, and he has a great quote in National Geographic, and he says, conservation isn't about one conservation hero. It's about bringing as many people as we can on board. And we can only succeed if so many hands come together for the same cause. So
that is a good quote.
It's such a great quote. So please share. The more people you tell, the more action can result. And in addition to that, I also just want to say thank you for loving Madagascar and lemurs, but remember your local ecosystems too.
No, I love that. All right. Well, man, that was a lot that we covered, but I hope that everyone out there has a better appreciation for lemurs, a better appreciation for the Duke Lemur Center. And thank you a million times, Sara, for coming on. We were so excited to get an expert. We've had, a zookeeper on here. We've had some other conservationists, but we were really excited to have someone from Duke Lemur Center.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thrilled. So thank you for reaching out to me.
Absolutely. So we will, like I said, we'll be celebrating World Lemur Day, and I know that Duke will be celebrating it as well. So I'm sure follow Duke's social media sites, follow our social media sites, and tune in next week because we've got lots more great content coming your way. And thank you again, Sara.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone.